We all know that recently, Star Rail has been all about pushing team archetypes. Break has become incredibly strong in all combat scenarios, follow-up teams have become more fleshed out, DOT is still in a decent spot despite not having an optimal dedicated support yet, and your standard DPS characters that don't fall into any of the other categories, yeah, they need some help. But what if I told you there's another kind of team that used to be pushed by the devs with buffs spanning across multiple updates that has actually been completely abandoned? I'm of course talking about Mono Quantum, one of the most unique and interesting teams to come out of Star Rail's early meta. Let's talk about the conditions that allowed for a monotype team to succeed back then, how that changed, and discuss whether a similar team could possibly succeed in the current design landscape of the game. Of the 7 unique elements or damage types in the game, the only one to emerge as its own respectable team composition was Quantum, because 1.1 introduced the game's first offense-oriented limited 5-star support, Silverwolf. Her most unique aspect is her skill's ability to implant an additional type weakness on an enemy based on the types used on your current team. The type is chosen at random, which means that having less total types on your lineup is encouraged for more consistent applications. This allows for 2 reliable use cases. Scenario 1, where all enemies are already weak to Quantum, so Silverwolf would always implant the type of your last non-Quantum team member, and Scenario 2, where your Mono Quantum team has type advantage against literally any enemy in the game. This, combined with her strong defense and type resistance shred, the strength of Zila and Qingque as damage dealers, and having Fu Xuan or Lynx as good defensive options, meant that this team was both powerful and universally strong against any enemy. The next limited 5-star Quantum character seemingly further solidified this team's place in the game, with Sparkle having her last Ascension trace give pretty big attack buffs to the team for the simple condition of having more Quantum type allies. Okay, so where did it all go wrong then? It'd be easy to just say the main units driving the team comp have fallen off a bit in lieu of newer, stronger releases, but that doesn't really tell the full story. While the state of a team archetype can be identified through its key members, the longevity of it is determined by how buffable it is. I mean, follow-up wasn't all that with just Jingyuan and Topaz, but then we got Aventurine, Robin, and Fei Xiao for a massive glow-up. Monotype teams just don't have anything to build off of because their synergy is wholly based around them simply being in the same broad category of characters rather than having inherent strengths that work well off each other. Like as an example, Black Swan is able to apply more damage stacks when an ally triggers DOTs, and her ultimate counts as every other type of DOT so that allies can detonate them even if they haven't applied their own DOT yet, creating a really cool two-way synergy. Mono Quantum has never had anything like this. While each unit does benefit from what the others provide, it's nowhere near the degree of cohesiveness that is normal for team compositions today. And if Hoyoverse wanted to specifically buff a monotype team, they have extremely limited options. The main thing that differentiates types gameplay-wise is the debuff they apply on Weakness Break, which for the majority of the roster has zero interaction with the rest of their gameplay design. So while you could make a support that does something like massively buffs these effects, it's probably not going to be very strong or interesting because it interacts with a minor quality of a character's kit and not the focus of their mechanics. In a similar sense, having same type buffing passives is pretty bad design because it creates such a narrow window for partners that can fully make use of it. The optimal teammate would have to be the correct type while also synergizing with the given character, and as we've seen with Yukong, that dream partner might just never come. The Star Rail devs have since realized it makes way more sense to ignore the typing altogether and just try to make units that work well with each other, giving rise to the modern team archetypes. So that's why I think monotypes were always doomed to be phased out, but it also didn't help that Mono Quantum's most unique strength of being usable against enemies with any weakness type has been overshadowed by break characters that can implant their own weakness type or ignore types altogether, and if you're Firefly, then both. I mean, it was fairly justified because while most teams suffer some DPS loss against enemies with the wrong weakness, break actually does almost nothing in the same scenario. It's just unfortunate Mono Quantum got caught in the crossfire there. I don't think it's impossible for any monotype team to succeed though, because there is one that has pretty good potential to become more of its own gameplay archetype by focusing on a subset of similar characters within a type rather than the entire category. Some physical fire, wind, and lightning characters can apply their own DOTs of the same kind as their weakness breaks, but at that point they're already under the DOT umbrella and it wouldn't make sense for them to have a focus on their own type. But Ice is the only element in which more than half of its characters can directly apply its completely unique debuff without weakness breaking. When applied, Freeze stops the target from moving on their current turn, but also advances their next turn forward by 50% to make it a little more fair. So to make ice characters feel more unique, 5 of the current 8 in the game can apply it through their abilities. Jingliu with her technique, Gepard with his skill, Misha and March with their ultimates, and Yenching with his talents follow-up. I think it was a logical attempt to differentiate one of the game's types, but unfortunately it's pretty clear that Freeze ended up not being very well liked by Star Rail's design team. I mean, yeah, it has the potential to make enemies unable to move indefinitely, which is why there's multiple systems in place to ensure it's not consistent. First, the characters that can freeze have a low base chance to do so, much less than weakness breaking's default 150%, and they really don't want to build effect hit rate because then they'll be missing the stats they need to do their primary jobs. But then you also have to factor in enemy effect resistance, which has a higher base rate for bigger enemies and then gets even greater with level. But wait, there's more, because enemies can also have individual debuff resistances, of which Freeze has it the worst by far. It's pretty common for bosses to have resistance against some combination of the debuffs that can delay actions, being Freeze, Entanglement, and Imprisonment, but it's a constant that Freeze is always included in that mix. Oh yeah, and certain enemies have 100% freeze resistance just because. The intention to set ice characters apart makes sense in theory, but in practice, freeze is too strong of a debuff to make consistent, and so trying to play around it just feels really bad. The design problems don't end there though, because even landing it doesn't accomplish a whole lot. The game has continued along the trend of heavily encouraging you to bring a defensive support that is single-handedly able to keep the team alive and free of debuffs, so bringing one of them means that freezing to avoid taking hits doesn't actually benefit you that much. The damage potential is also not quite there. For the applications with abilities, it does a negligible amount of attack scaling damage, and on weakness break isn't much better. Ice legitimately has the worst interaction with Break out of all the types, which has been the most pushed team archetype as of recently. It's quite literally the only one where the Break debuff doesn't scale with Break effect. To be fair, the initial Break damage has a middling base multiplier at 1, but this table also shows you exactly why the game's premier Break units were selected to be physical and fire types. When it comes to the debuffs, however, Freeze always uses its fixed values, but physical, fire, lightning, and wind all apply DOTs that scale with break effect, and entanglement and imprisonment's action delay effect scales with the break stat as well. Of course, the lack of reliance on break effect has the upside of it being able to be used at full capacity regardless of the character's build, but it also means less value gained if you were to actually be running a break setup. This is possibly a contributing factor to why we haven't gotten an ice character for almost an entire year. And yes, I know Ruanmei is an ice type break effect support, but to be fair, her skill and ultimate aren't attacked, so you very rarely end up initiating breaks with her. So basically what I'm saying is that having freeze as a team archetype wouldn't work at all, as of now. Regardless of its current state, the fact that multiple characters have access to freeze as part of their kits means that a single character that can redefine the mechanic can redefine the team. I mean, the break archetype was only recently reinvented by Harmony Trailblazer, as Super Break removes all the inherent design weaknesses that used to plague break as a mechanic. 1. After breaking, you'd normally have to wait until the enemy recovered to do it again, but Super Break can continuously trigger as long as the enemy remains weakness broken. 2. While you still might want a specific character to land the initial weakness break, it's not the end of the world if someone else does, because it still enables all allies to deal super break damage. And 3. Toughness reduction is a wasted stat if there's no toughness bar to reduce, but now enhancing it accelerates the initial break, on top of it directly contributing to super break damage by being included right there in the damage calculation. So while it would require a very creative approach, and me thinking of ideas would probably need its own video, I do think freeze can potentially be made into something more in line with the design of the game's current archetypes. At least as of now, the other types don't have nearly as much to work with, so ice might actually be the last hope for monotype teams. Not that it really matters, because going away from them is indisputably a better direction for the game. Well anyways, I hope you found this video to be interesting or insightful. Subscribe for more Star Rail discussion videos, and as always, thanks for watching.